Freddy vs. Jason, the Novelization, Chapter 11. Inside 1428 Elm Street, a few minutes later, Lori found herself becoming ever more disturbed. She had never seen her dad like that before, fighting. And he'd admitted, only now, only when forced, he'd admitted that Will had been one of his patients. Dr. Campbell had lied to Lori. And what about Will's story? Could Dr. Campbell really have killed Lori's mom? Where did her father's lies end? Dr. Campbell closed the front door and walked into the living room. Lori sat down on the couch, shell-shocked, soaked to the bone but uncaring. Rain continued to beat down on the windows, on the roof, and thunder rumbled ominously overhead. It felt as if the whole world was shaking. And Campbell, Dr. Campbell, he stood there in the dimly lit living room, wet, disheveled, nose still bleeding. He looked haggard, and she could see him breathing fast, his heart racing. He looked desperate, cornered, like a killer? Lori cut him off. Did Mom die in a car accident? She asked. Of course she did, honey, of course. Lori turned to look right into his eyes. She needed to know the truth. In 2 days, her entire life, everything she thought she knew, had turned to shit. Now she had to start rebuilding. She had to put a new life back together again. A life based on truth instead of lies. She didn't know what this new life would be, but she really had no choice. Time to lay the first brick. Prove it! She demanded of her bedraggled father. Show me the death certificate. Show me an autopsy report, anything. Campbell walked over to her, tried to reach for her. I really don't think now's the time to... Lori brushed him aside and got up from the sofa. He took another step forward and she backed away. Oh, I think now's the perfect time, she said, almost accusingly. Then she drove the stake right home. Why don't you tell me about Weston Hills, Dad? Do you work there? Because I thought you were a fucking general practitioner. Lori was now really upset. Campbell was hardly in a rush to defend himself, to prove she was wrong. Yes, he offered. I do some consulting at Weston, but it's not what you... Oh, God. So you knew where Will was this whole time? Tears flooded Lori's eyes. She could see his shoulders sag. She knew she was right. She knew. Listen to me, Lori. Unbelievable. The voice, suddenly, he was talking to her like she was one of his patients. You're upset. We both are. What you need, more than anything right now, is some rest. He reached into his sodden jacket pocket and pulled out a small bottle of pills. Hypnosil. Let me give you something to help you sleep, honey. He uncapped the bottle. Then we can talk about all of this in the... I don't want to sleep, Dad, Lori interjected. I want to know why you've been lying to me. But Campbell wasn't listening. She needed sleep. He had medication. He could control the situation. We'll talk in the morning, Lori, he said forcefully, tipping 2 of the pills into his hand. Now just do what I say. Lori shook her head. She wanted answers from her dad, not damn pills. First he'd fought with Will, and now this. Lori turned abruptly and ran up the stairs. The stairs were firm, solid. She had no trouble reaching her room in double quick time. Campbell ran after her. Lori! God damn it, his daughter, all he had left. Lori slammed the bedroom door hard in his face and locked it. He shook the door handle and knocked, and tried the door handle again and again. Lori, open this door right now, honey. Get away from me! Lori was angry, sad, frightened, confused, upset, betrayed. Why won't he shut up and leave her alone? Dr. Campbell kept shouting, rattling the door, banging at it with his shoulder. No! Lori was terrified. She clicked on the CD player and turned it up as loud as she could. She didn't want to hear her father anymore. His banging, his shouting. Like a child, she hoped if she drowned out the noise, the problem would go away. But it wouldn't, and Lori was terrified. Terrified of her own father. Terrified of this Krueger guy and the psycho at the cornfield. Terrified of the murders. Terrified of the truth about Will. But terrified of her own dad? She jammed the back of a wooden chair under the door handle. He was ramming the door. Her dad was throwing himself against her bedroom door. He was trying to break it down, trying to force his way in. Her own dad. "Damn it, Lori! Open the goddamn door!" Bam! Cracks started to appear in the door jamb. The whole frame was starting to give. Lori looked around in panic. Where? Bam! The window. Lori ran to the window and hauled it open. Wasting no time, she climbed through and, ignoring the pouring rain, got onto the roof. Bam! She could still hear him trying to smash an entrance into her room. Down she went, lowering her light body down onto the rose trellis, which she then climbed down to the lawn. She had barely reached the ground and hurled over to the cover of the bushes when she heard her dad finally break down the bedroom door. From her hiding place, Lori could see him up in her room pacing back and forth in impotent rage. She nearly jumped when he thrust his face out through her bedroom window. He seemed to be looking right at her. "Lori!" he bellowed. "Lori!" Dr. Campbell was furious, but he couldn't see her. Sobbing with the unrelenting horror of her situation, Lori turned and ran smack into a soaking wet jacket. Strong arms pinned her and dragged her into the shelter of a nearby wall of shrubs. Lori almost screamed, but the stranger hissed in her ear. It's okay, Will said. "It's me." Campbell was still raging and calling Lori's name. Will looked up. The sight of Campbell reminded him of... He led Lori away, and they crept quietly off down the street, until at last they were out of sight of her home. They took cover under a tree, partly to hide from anyone who might come by, and partly to shelter from the storm. But they didn't have to wait long before the rain first eased off, then finally stopped altogether. Although by then they were both soaked. "God," Lori wept. I just feel like my whole world's falling out from under me." "Now you know how I felt the last 4 years," replied Will softly. The last 4 years. She had to know. Lori stilled herself, then seized Will's total attention. "Tell me what you saw," she said, and Will knew exactly what she meant. After his fight with Campbell, and the near escape from Sheriff Williams, Will wasn't going to hold his punches any longer. "I saw him kill her," he said flatly. "I was sneaking up to your room like I used to do. Only you weren't there." What he had seen 4 years ago on that stormy night was the only nightmare that had ever haunted Will. Only this was a living, breathing nightmare, not some boogeyman bullshit in a colorblind sweater. It had been a beautiful, warm fall evening, dark but with a mild breeze, and Will had been looking forward to spending some time with his girlfriend. He knew Lori's parents wouldn't want him to call so late, so he'd snuck through the yard of 1428 Elm and climbed up the rose trellis. The same trellis Lori had just used to escape her angry father. But Will had barely reached the level of Lori's window when he'd heard a scream. Not a playful scream, not a kid's scream, or a scream from the television. It was a full-throated, terror-stricken well of icy, mind-paralyzing horror. The sound had frightened Will so much that he'd nearly fallen from his window perch. Luckily, he held on tight, only to have his sense of shock replaced by a deep, nauseating, unrelenting fear. Lori's bedroom door had been open, and Will was able to see through it, across the hall, and into her parents' bedroom. He could see Mrs. Campbell. She was on her bed flailing, her chest covered in cuts. She was thrashing among the bed sheets, covered in blood, bleeding the death of a slaughtered epileptic. Lori was nowhere to be seen, but then Will saw Dr. Campbell. Campbell had stepped into view with a knife in his hand. Will saw him walk up to his wife as she lay there, convulsing, bleeding to death on their maternal bed. Then Campbell had lunged forward with the knife, a long, sharp knife, the kind of stainless steel kitchen knife you hack up cuts of meat with. Then, just like tonight, the night Will was telling all this to Lori, a sudden flash of lightning cut through the night sky, and it was at this precise moment that Dr. Campbell had turned to stare right over at Will as the boy sat there balanced in Lori's window frame. Will was perfectly clear in the brilliant white light, and their eyes had met. Will's eyes, the eyes of a terrified boy. Campbell's eyes, the eyes of a knife-wielding murderer, standing proud over the heaving bloody corpse of his dead wife. And that was the story. Will had fled, the cops had caught up with him, and nobody listened. Campbell signed the admittance forms, and the rest was inmate history. But then there was Mark's story. "I don't know how your father's connected to all of this," pondered Will. "But I think Mark was right. There's some kind of cover-up going on here with this Krueger. We can't trust the police, Lori. We can't trust any of the adults." This rang true with Lori. She'd had her own intuitions about the police, but she was still coming to terms with that, and with what Will had said about her dad. It couldn't be true, and even if it was, how could it be tied in with Krueger, or the maniac at that party? God, both Trey and her mom had died in the same room. She shut it out of her mind. She had to concentrate. Whatever the answer to all of this was, Lori knew she couldn't fix this thing on her own, and she couldn't go back to her father. All she could do was move forward, and for now that meant working stuff out with Will. He seemed to have some idea of what was going on, which was more than she had. "So what do we do?" asked Lori. "We gotta get Mark," answered Will. "He's the expert on all of this." Okay, so maybe Will didn't have all the answers after all. Then again, Mark knew about her dream. He knew about the rhyme and the Krueger guy. Maybe Will was right. Maybe between the two of them and Mark, they could form some kind of plan. Then she could call Kia. Huddled there under the trees, Will squeezed her hand, shaking her out of her thoughts. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you, no matter what. I'm not leaving you again." Lori needed to hear this. Her dad had tried to drug her. That was his solution. But Will offered her support, strength, and maybe love? Lori smiled. She prayed to God that her father was wrong, and that Will and Mark weren't merely escaped lunatics. "You're the only boy I've ever kissed. Do you know that?" she asked. Will pretended to scowl. "Don't take this the wrong way, but I kinda hope I'm the last one you kiss as well." Mark had spent the whole night alone. His parents hadn't shown. They must be out of town, and no one had called or bothered him. A police car rolled by a couple of times, but Mark didn't see anyone watching the house full time. So he'd just gone to his bedroom and taken a tour down memory lane. He hoped to God that Will hadn't done anything stupid, and he wanted his dead brother's van back in one piece. Mark sat at his old desk. He hadn't used his computer, or any computer for that matter, for years. It had been a miserable night. It only stopped raining a few moments ago. He pulled open a drawer beside his legs and took out a framed photo. The photo was old. It showed a cute little blonde kid riding on the shoulders of a handsome, dark-haired young man. The cute kid was smiling. His eyes were open, warm, betraying nothing of the intensity they showed in Mark now. Mark stroked a finger over the face of the bigger kid. "You always looked out for me, Bobby." Bobby, his older brother, carrying a very young Mark on his broad shoulders. Mark remembered the day the photo was taken. It was out by the shore, the place they always went on vacation. Mark looked more closely at the image of his brother's face. Bobby, closer. Bobby winked. What the hell? Mark shook his head. He must have imagined. Zwip! The computer, Mark's computer, had turned itself on. The small green power light was on, and there was a picture on the monitor. What's that, streamed video or something? It was a high-angle image, like from a webcam or a closed-circuit TV system. A high-angle view of his own bathroom. The image crackled, sometimes broke into squares, and occasionally locked up, then jumped forward a few frames, like a live digital feed. Someone was walking into the bathroom. A young man naked. But the camera was over the bathroom door, so Mark could only see the man's back as he walked forward toward the bathtub. He didn't know who the young man was. Was this a tape or a video or digital recording of some kind? The man turned on the faucet and started to fill the bathtub with water. Then he backed out of the room. This was freaky. Who was it? How was this happening? Though frightened, Mark couldn't help but watch as the action unfolded. The room looked like his bathroom, the bathroom here in his parents' home, but he didn't know who the guy was or what. The man walked back into view. Again, Mark couldn't see his face, but he could see that the man was now holding a straight razor. Enough! Mark reached under the desk and ripped the computer plug out of the wall socket. Mark didn't know what it was all about. He didn't know how his computer had turned itself on, and he didn't give a damn. The pictures, still running on the screen, were starting to get creepy. Naked guy with the razor? Jeez. The sound of the water running into the bathtub was pretty realistic. But, wait a fucking minute. The computer's turned off at the wall. Mark could still hear the water running. He leaned back on his seat so that he could see out of the bedroom, down the short hallway to the bathroom. The sound was coming from inside the bathroom, and there was steam coming out from under the bathroom door. Had someone come home and decided to take a bath, not knowing that Mark was in the house? What about the computer thing, and why didn't Mark hear anyone arrive? Mark chewed at his bottom lip, then slowly, hesitantly got up off his seat. He walked out of the bedroom and stepped down the hall in the direction of the bathroom. The water was getting louder, the steam thicker. Mark could almost feel the heat and the humidity of the room as he reached for the bathroom knob. He paused. What if it was Mom? He didn't want to catch her naked. Should he call out? Mark took a breath and opened the door. The bathroom was empty. No water in the tub, no steam, no naked guy. The bathroom was empty. Mark sighed with relief and rubbed his eyes. He must have imagined it all. The whole thing must be messing with his nerves or something. Maybe he'd been daydreaming. I've got to stay awake, he told himself. He tried to calm down. Maybe there was something in the bathroom medicine cabinet that could help. He was way beyond the black coffee stage. He walked over to the mirror door cabinet, opened it, and rummaged around until he found a bottle of No-Dose. Just what he was looking for. Relieved, Mark started to walk away, swinging the cabinet door shut behind. What was that? Mark whipped around and looked at the mirror. Just his own face, nothing unusual. He could have sworn for a second back there that he'd caught sight of someone or something moving in the cabinet mirror. He was convinced he'd seen a flash of someone, in a red and green sweater and a snap-brimmed hat. Someone with a butt-ugly face. Wasn't that how everybody was describing Krueger? It was getting to him. It was his imagination. He was tired. But he couldn't sleep. Will could be back with the van any time. Still, all this had shaken Mark badly. First the business with the computer, and now this. Maybe it was because he hadn't taken any Hypnosil in over 24 hours now. God, what if I'm just crazy after all? Mark's eyes twitched erratically as he opened the bottle of stimulants. Shit, only one left. Still, one's better than none at all. Mark dropped the pill out of the bottle and into his hand, where it bounced and dropped into the bathroom sink. Oh no! The pill rebounded and jumped around the sink, falling even lower. No, no, no! Circling. No! Mark shot his hand out to grab the pill, but it circled in an even tighter orbit before quickly rolling down the drain. No! God, shit! He peered down into the basin. And now he was standing in a puddle of warm water. Where the hell did that come from? He hadn't turned on any of the faucets. He looked down to see if he could follow the water to its source. Only it wasn't water. It was blood. Mark was standing in a small puddle of blood. A puddle that had collected from a thin trickle that had run along the floor from the base of the bathtub. Mark's eyes followed the line of blood up the side of the tub until he saw the slit wrists. Slit wrists. The body. The wrists. Hanging over the side of the tub. The body. Blood dripping from suicidal slit wrist, landing drop by drop on the sheer white tiles. The body. It was Bobby, Mark's long-dead brother. Oh, God, Mark whined. I'm dreaming. I'm dreaming. Bobby's eyes snapped open, dead, cadaverous eyes. Mark whimpered as Bobby's corpse eyes latched onto his own. When last Mark had seen Bobby's eyes, it had been in the vacation photograph. Now Bobby's eyes were seeing Mark from beyond the grave. "Hey, bro, how's it going?" Unbelievably, Bobby's voice seemed perfectly normal, natural, almost relaxed considering he was dead, but the tone, the style, didn't sound quite right. It was Bobby's voice, but the speaker seemed more spiteful, more vindictive. "You didn't forget about me, did you?" Mark snapped. He turned to run, but his bare feet were stuck to the floor. What the fuck? His feet were glued to the bloody puddle, a puddle that began to mutate and take form as tendrils of blood rose from the tiles and stabbed themselves like little needles into Mark's feet, pinning the terrified boy in place. "Oh, that's right," said Bobby. "Everyone forgot! That's why they weren't afraid anymore. That's why I needed Jason to kill for me, to make them remember." What was his brother saying? With that voice, it didn't make any sense. Jason, who? This isn't real, Mark said determinedly. He had to wake up. Bobby ignored him. "But now, Jason just won't stop." "Somebody please wake me up," cried Mark. "Hey, didn't Mommy teach you not to talk with your mouth full?" sneered the bleeding suicide. Something was wrong inside Mark. Correction, something was wrong inside Mark. Something moving. Mark bent double and began to convulse, his feet still locked in place by the pins of congealed blood. He retched once, then again. Mark's whole frame shook as he heaved and puked, straining every muscle in his stomach wall. Tears filled his eyes as something dark and rank slithered out of his mouth. He groaned and gasped. Here came another and another. A dozen slimy, squirming black eels thrashed at his feet. He was helpless to stop the agony. Mark folded in on himself, clutching his midriff, puking and gagging, wanting to turn himself inside out, anything to get rid of the writhing eels he was now retching all over the bathroom floor. The glistening black things wriggled down his chest, his neck, over his face, his feet. Mark was puking worms, while the gloating corpse of his brother bled slowly to death in the bathtub. "He's asleep." Will was looking in through Mark's window. His friend was fast asleep, slumped awkwardly in front of his computer, head down on his desk. "Mark!" Will tapped lightly on the window. He and Lori had driven straight over, but the last thing Will expected was to find his friend asleep. Will tried again. "Mark!" Bobby sat up in the tub. "I need your help, Mark. I'd do the job on Jason myself. But that son of a bitch, he doesn't sleep." Mark was still doubled over, weighed down inside a mess of black, writhing shit. Bobby rose and got slowly up out of the tub, naked, bleeding, spraying fine red jets of spent life over his bare chest and thighs. When Bobby next spoke, "I own you. I own all of you. You're my children, not Jason's." Mark cringed, groveling and writhing before the feet of his dead brother. Finally he understood. It was never Bobby. It had never been Bobby. From the moment his computer had turned itself on, everything had all been Freddy fucking Krueger. "No!" Mark screamed. "I won't do it! I won't do it!" Bobby chuckled menacingly, then strode towards Mark. As Bobby moved, his bare arms and legs started to bubble and burn. Mark looked up in horror as smoke began to rise from his brother's skin, almost as if, impossibly, his brother was on fire from inside his own body. But it wasn't Bobby. Jesus! A nauseating smell of burnt flesh filled Mark's nostrils as the scalding form of his naked brother came closer and closer. The skin blistered. The blisters burned. The skin scarred over. Wept pus bled, shriveled, burned. The body, it became Freddy Krueger. "Oh, you won't do it?" Freddy said mockingly. "Then pass along a little message for me." Freddy seized hold of Mark, pulled him up from the floor, ripping his feet free of the blood pincers, then hurled the boy up against the bathroom ceiling. Mark hit the ceiling hard and stayed there. Mark started howling. "Somebody wake me up! Please! Please!" It was as if his body had been glued to the ceiling. His stomach pressed hard against the plaster, leaving his back vulnerable to the dream killer beneath. Mark strained, turned his head to try to look down at Freddy. "Oh!" Mark's shirt exploded into flames, then fell away, leaving the fair skin of his back completely and utterly exposed. Freddy fanned out the fingers of his razor glove, looked up at Mark's knotted spine, and smiled. "Showtime!" Will and Lori pulled hard at the window, but it refused to budge. Inside, smoke was starting to rise from Mark's sleeping body. He just lay at his desk smoldering. Their friend was on fire. "Mark!" shouted Will as he tried to break open the tough window frame. Mark cried out in agony. His whole back was on fire. Gritting his teeth against the pain, he craned his neck, twisting it as far as it would go to try to see what was happening. He could make out letters. Yes, letters. He had been branded in some way. There were words on his back, but he couldn't make them out because not only could he not see the entire words, but also the letters were written backwards. Mark sat bolt upright behind the desk and screamed. Then he leapt to his feet and began clawing at the blazing shirt on his back. Will and Lori looked on in horror as Mark jerked and threw himself around the room before falling out of view. They had to help him. Will looked around frantically for something, anything. A rock was lying in the damp earth a few paces away. With Lori urging his every step, Will darted and grabbed the rock, then ran back to the window. He got ready to break the glass when Mark's head burst up into view. They couldn't hear him through the thick window. His eyes were pleading. His mouth moved soundlessly. While the two of them looked on helpless, 4 deep bloody slashes hacked their way across Mark's face. 4 parallel razor cuts, a synchronized slashing, cutting through Mark's wide open eyes, his cheeks, his lips, even tearing open the gums between his teeth. Mark's face exploded in a plume of blood, then he collapsed. Lori and Will looked on aghast as their friend sunk, broken to the floor of his bedroom. Behind Mark were the mirrored doors of his closet. Will could see these doors, and as Mark fell, Will saw the reflection of Mark's back. He saw the words that had been burned in reverse on Mark's skin. Will read the backward Freddy brand in the reflective glass and saw the simple message that the bastard had left there. Freddy's back. A teenage kid's face, and another one, and another one. God damn it, such a pretty young thing. Williams threw the photos down onto his desk. Scene of crime photos, every one of them. The kids were all killed out at Grover's Field last night. They were at an unlicensed public event, drinking booze, taking drugs, and doing God knows what else. The sheriff sighed. His desk was covered with files and photographs, witness reports, statements, initial autopsy findings. This case was totally out of control. It had started with the death of that boy on Elm Street, at that house. Then a friend of the boy had died, and then the friend's father. Then the Rollins and Davis boys had busted out of Weston, and now all this. They were losing the battle. There had been very few times during Williams' long career in law enforcement when this veteran had felt overwhelmed. Now was one of them. Brushing the photos aside, he sank his head into his hands. If he thought it would do any good, he'd have called in the bureau. Someone tapped at the glass window on his door. It was Deputy Stubbs, an odd expression on his face. The sheriff made no reply, so Stubbs walked in anyway. "Sheriff," he said tentatively, "I've been compiling info based on eyewitness reports of the hockey mask killer. Now I think we're dealing with—" Williams raised a hand for silence. "We already know who did this." Officer Goodman bustled in, pushing his way in front of Stubbs. "Sheriff," said Goodman, "we closed down the school, set a curfew for anyone under 18. "What?" Stubbs didn't get it. What was wrong with this place? First Williams tried to cut Stubbs out of the loop, then he tried to pin the first 3 murders on that Blake kid, and now he says he knows who's responsible for all the killings, and there's a curfew? What the hell is going on? Williams nodded his approval. "Good. Now I need 24-hour roadblocks set up. Nobody leaves town and nobody gets in. We gotta contain this son of a bitch before he spreads any further." Orders received. Goodman nodded and briskly left Stubbs and the sheriff to whatever it was they were doing before he had butted in. Stubbs closed the office door. He couldn't hide an inch of the confusion he was feeling. "Shouldn't we get the FBI to—" Williams talked over him. "No outsiders, Stubbs. We can handle this. We've stopped him before." "I'm lost here. Stopped who before?" Williams paused, picked up another of the black and white photos of the murdered kids. "We don't say his name out loud," murmured the sheriff. "You're not from around here, son. I don't expect you to understand." Stubbs almost hit the roof. "With all due respect, Sheriff, I think we have a copycat of the old Jason Voorhees Crystal Lake Killer on our hands." Williams did not like the tone of Stubbs' voice. He let the photo fall, got up out of his chair, and put himself right into Stubbs' face. "We do things around here a certain way for a reason, son, and that's given us 4 years apiece. So you either do what you're told with your mouth shut, or God help me, I will lock you up, understand?" Lock me up? Stubbs couldn't believe what he was hearing. This was crazy talk. But what could he do? He couldn't do anything here. But maybe. Stubbs nodded. Okay, Williams could have this round. But there's no way Stubbs was going to let any more kids get killed by this Voorhees wannabe. If he had to, Stubbs would go way outside the system. He didn't want to. It was against his nature. But he had no choice. He'd call in the Bureau. Get these Springwood inbreds back into line. But only when he had enough evidence. But from where Sheriff Williams was standing, Deputy Stubbs was beaten. "Good," snapped the sheriff. "Now get the hell out of here and find that Rollins boy." This was an obvious diversion. Williams was sending Stubbs on a go-fetch to keep him out of the way. Fine. He'd go fetch. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been Chapter 11 of Freddy vs. Jason. Hope you've enjoyed it so far. I really enjoyed this chapter. I was actually going to do 2 chapters tonight, but since I started, it started storming, and it was not too bad. I was able to get most of it done since the beginning of this chapter had storms in it, but it's getting worse and worse. So I'm going to have to wrap it up here. But yay, Freddy got his 1 kill. You know, I'm really starting to doubt that they're going to do anything different in this book and give him an extra kill. But it would be nice, you know, or at least just a couple more badass scenes other than fighting Jason or fucking with Jason. But I always enjoyed Mark's death scene with Freddy because it was just perfect. The only thing it was missing was the boiler room. But we got a lot of that with Gibb. And I love the double entendre of Freddy's back. You know, it's like, he's back, and this is Freddy's back. I wish I could have done more justice to Bobby and his voice changing from Bobby's voice to Freddy's. I did the best I could with that. I hope it didn't ruin it for anybody, but, you know, we got that whole scene, Mark and Will sitting there watching it. Freddy's wanting to send his message. Freddy's really showing his frustration at this point that Jason is just going overboard with the killing. I mean, what the hell was Freddy expecting, you know? Whenever he picked Jason to go out and stir up shit to get people scared again, what did he think was going to happen? That Jason was going to go kill a couple people and be like, "Okay, Freddy, I'm done now. Okay, Fred." Be like Barney from the Flintstones and be all like, "Hi, Fred, I'm done." But no. Jason's pissing off Freddy. Freddy's ready to deal with Jason. We're getting to the meat of the story here. And then we have Stubbs dealing with Sheriff Williams. And I always love that line. You know, Stubbs is sitting there confused as hell. And Williams is sitting here rattling on and on and on about, we don't say his name. We keep it a secret. We've tied him down for 4 years, and we don't want to bring him back. And the whole time Stubbs is like, I think we got ourselves a copycat of the old Jason Voorhees Crystal Lake murders. I love that at least one character in Springwood knows about Jason and is like trying to tie this together. And I'm pretty sure the next part, whenever we get back to this book tomorrow, which I will have another upload out tomorrow, weather permitting, is whenever he meets up with the kids, and they talk down in the basement and start putting their plan together. I really wish that Stubbs could have lived longer in the movie. I know he's probably not going to in the book, but he was one of my favorite characters in the movie, and I just feel like he could have done more. But he did have a very shocking death. It was so shocking. That's my dad joke of the day. I get one. So yeah, guys, here we are, Chapter 11. We're a little over halfway through the book. I'm a little bit disappointed because the beginning really made me think it was going to take a lot of original takes and take some creative liberties. Because in the prologue in Chapter 1, a lot of stuff was added, and a lot of creative liberties were given. But since then, it's been pretty much a carbon copy with a few little changes here and there, little tiny minuscule ones, but changes nonetheless. There was a couple in this chapter, if you noticed them. Anyways, guys, I'm going to quit boring you. I'll be back very soon with more of Freddy vs. Jason, the novelization by Stephan. Until then, I want to say thank you all so much for listening. Thank you for supporting the channel. I know it's tough out there, and it's just a really hard time, and I hope that I'm bringing at least a teeny bit of enjoyment to your lives during this isolation and quarantine. And I promise to continue putting out as much content as I can, and I'm going to keep it bloody. And until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian, saying thanks for stopping in, thanks for listening, and pleasant dreams!
Hi, this is Jeffrey Reddick, creator of Final Destination.
Greetings, Slashaholics. This is David Bergantino, author of the Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror books, the Bard's Blood horror Shakespeare books.
Hey guys, this is Jason Brooks, Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th Vengeance.
Hey, this is Slasher Pepper.
Hey everybody, it's CJ Graham, Jason, Friday the 13th Part 6.
This is William Pattison, known to Friday the 13th fans as Eric Morris.
Hi, this is Deborah Voorhees from Friday the 13th Part 5.
Hey folks, this is Adam Marcus, director of Jason Goes to Hell and Secret Santa.
Hello kiddies, this is John Kassir, the voice of the Crypt Keeper.
Hi, this is Kane Hodder, better known as Jason from Friday the 13th, Victor Crowley from Hatchet.
And you are listening.
You're listening.
And you're listening.
And you're listening.
Just want to make sure you guys know you're listening.
You are listening.
And you are listening.
And you are lucky enough to be listening.
Okay, boils and ghouls, you are listening.
You are listening
to the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
The 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To 80s Slasher Librarian.
To 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
to the 80s Slasher Librarian. Keep listening, or I'll kill you.